How to plant lavender in your garden. I have 5 lavender planting tips for you and you don't want to miss them. And if you stick around to the very end, I have a bonus pro tip for you. Hi, I'm Julie and I am so glad you are here today. So grab those garden gloves and let's get to it. Today I'm planting an English lavender called Rosa into this beautiful container I got at Home Depot for just 11 bucks. Now I have 2 cubic feet of soil in a wheelbarrow and I'm going to add a bag of pure perlite in it. You want to stay away from vermiculite. It actually will retain water in your soil and you want to have something that's going to improve the drainage, and perlite is the trick for that. Or even if you have a bag of sand, that would work really well too. I'm going to add a cubic foot of perlite to my 2 cubic feet of potting soil because the potting soil came with some perlite already in it. You can do a 50-50 ratio if you want, 2 cubic feet of perlite to 2 cubic feet of soil. Go ahead and mix it in. You can do your bare hands if you want. Perlite is a natural product. It comes from a volcanic glass, but it's very lightweight and it will not cut you. Tip number 1 is plant that lavender in full sunlight. Now, if you can't find full sunlight in your garden, as long as that lavender plant is in a spot that gets 80% of the day's sunlight, you are going to be in great shape. Tip number 2 is plant that lavender in a good drainage soil. Now, if you have a property that has a lot of clay in the soil, and how you can tell is if you get a little shovel, dig a little bit of soil out, squeeze that soil in your hand, and if it clumps together like a piece of fudge, then you have clay in your soil. That type of soil retains the water. And lavender is a high desert plant. It likes to stay dry. So if you have clay-based soil, you might have to do a little bit of augmentation to get your lavender to grow, or better yet, just plant in containers. Now, the soil type that you want is a sandy, loamy soil. When you dig that soil up and squeeze it in your hand, it's going to fall apart like a piece of cornbread. So that type of soil is nice and loose and the water can drain through it rather quickly, so the roots of that lavender plant will stay nice and dry. I have 2 French lavenders. They're Grosso lavenders, one of my absolute favorites because of the intense lavender smell, but they're outgrowing their gallon-sized containers. So I'm going to place them into 7-gallon containers, and that should get them through this season. But eventually, they're going to have to go into a large container like I put the English lavender in. Or I think what I'm going to do with these guys is get a couple of whiskey barrels. I love whiskey barrels, and they are the perfect size for French lavender because French lavenders can grow pretty darn big. Grossos can be about 2.5 to 3 feet across and 1.5 to 2 feet tall, and that's before they have their flower spikes on that can get up to 24 inches long. So I am really excited to get these into some larger containers and let those roots grow. Tip number 3 is plant that lavender at the right time of year. You can plant at any season except winter. If you plant in the spring and summer, you're going to have to be a little bit more diligent about watering your lavender about once a week to make sure it gets nice and established. Now, if you plant in the fall, which is my favorite time of year to plant, and when I'm going to be planting around 100 lavender plants in my yard this year, in the fall, I just let the fall rains water my plants, so I don't have to worry about watering or irrigation or anything like that. I just let Mother Nature do it for me. Now, tip number 4 is trim and pinch back your lavender. Now, I know a lot of you have been emailing me and saying, hey Julie, do I really have to pinch back those flowers because they look so pretty? And the answer is no, you don't have to. By pinching back the flowers, here, let me show you. This is a nice little Spanish lavender. By pinching back these flowers, what happens is the energy that would have gone into keeping this flower alive and letting this new flower bloom and growing this new flower several more inches, what happens with that energy is it gets diverted into the roots of the plant, and it will make the plant stronger. And we need to get this plant established that first year so it thrives and survives for a good 10 years in your garden. The other thing you want to do when you put it in the ground is go ahead and trim about 1/3 to 1/2 of the plant down, and you can shape it. And by doing this, the same thing. you have fewer leaves that need plant food, and so that energy, that food that the plant creates, is going to go into the root system and make it super strong. So if you have any new buds that will come up over the summer, just pinch them back. And remember, by doing that, you're feeding the root system and getting it nice and healthy and strong. Next season, when this plant starts to bloom, just let it go, and you will have a ton of beautiful blooms on this plant.
First, a bit of weeding on this super steep rocky slope, but it needs to be done before we plant. I'm going to be planting 4-inch pots of Provence lavender. It's a great little lavender. I absolutely love it. It's wonderful for cooking. I'm going to go ahead and loosen up those roots a bit. You can see this pot is pretty root bound, so I'm going to break that up before I put it in the hole. I'm going to add some of that potting soil into the hole because this slope is mainly sand, so I need to add some soil that has a few more nutrients to help that plant grow. I'm hoping it'll triple in size before fall comes. I've already trimmed the plant, so it doesn't need another trimming this year. I might take a look at it this fall, and if it needs a little bit of a trim, I can do it then. The last thing I'm going to do is give it a nice drink of water. I'm watering at the base of the plant. And I'm going to go ahead and add the rocks around it that I had moved. I'm hoping the rocks are going to protect that soil from blowing away during the high winds we get in this area. And it'll also add a little bit of protection for that plant. But the main thing is I feel it's going to help reflect the heat to the underside of the plant so it won't have any fungus issues, and it'll encourage the lavender to grow just a little bit faster.
Tip number 5 is how to water your lavender. If it's in a container, go ahead and water it once or twice a week. And if it's in the ground, maybe once a week if you planted it in the spring, or twice a week if you planted it in the summer to get it nice and established. But once the fall rains come, you don't need to water it. In my first lavender farm, once the fall rains come, I never watered again. For 15 years, I never watered the field. I just let Mother Nature do that for me. Now, the most important thing about watering your lavender is to be sure not to water overhead with your hose or a watering can. You want to water at the base of the lavender plant. This will protect your plant from splitting apart, which is so easy for it to do when it has those long flower spikes on it. So remember, water at the base only. Well, thanks for sticking around to the end. I cannot tell you how much that means to me. And if you haven't liked or subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. It just tells YouTube that you're interested in the content I'm creating, and they'll encourage me to make even more for you. Now, for that pro tip I talked about, the bonus tip at the end of the video, I have it for you, and it can apply to a home gardener who wants to plant a ton of lavender, or maybe in more traditional rows of lavender like I have at my farm, or for someone who is interested in growing lavender for profit. This is your tip. The tip is, when you're planting lavender in the ground, I highly, 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 highly encourage you not to skip weed cloth. Weed cloth is so important. I know so many growers who have put in their fields only to a year later take them out again, lay down weed cloth, and replant them all. Now, weed cloth that you need to get is not the kind that you buy at your local big box store. You want to get a commercial grade weed cloth that lasts for 20 years in the ground. In future videos, I'll talk about spacing lavender in those rows and how far apart those rows need to be. So stick around for more videos and more lavender pro tips at the end of those videos. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.